Very significant development today, viewers. The Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, was pretty much upstaged by US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who caught him completely by surprise by, I would assume, suggesting that Iran was a state sponsor of terror. Now, Iran has been a great friend of India, and by injecting that dynamic and not in any way referring to Pakistan in the same breath, it would appear that the Americans have gotten away by imposing their own priorities on the dialogue today. I want you to listen to this exchange. Let's play it out.
It's a little bit of a repetition, but really, we have a certain perspective on Iran, obviously, from where we are based, and the Secretary shared with me the American concerns on Iran. I would say, frankly, I guess both of us certainly came out much better informed of each other's concerns in that regard. In terms of common ground, though I used it for trade, we have common ground on energy as well. For us, it is important that global energy supplies remain predictable, that they remain affordable. And I think that's a concern to which Secretary Pompeo was certainly very, very receptive. I think he understands that this is today the world's fifth largest economy, which imports 85% of its energy, a large part of it from the Gulf. So I think he certainly gets, I guess I'm speaking for him, but I think looking at his face, he certainly gets what our interests are.
I'll just add on Iran, Chris. We all know that we need to keep that waterway open for the reasons that were just described. We also know that Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. And we know the Indian people, they have suffered from terror around the world. So I think there's a shared understanding of threat and a common purpose to ensure that we can keep energy at the right prices and deter this threat, not only the threat in the narrow confines of the Middle East, but the threat that this terror regime poses to the entire world.
Now, there you heard it. Complete abnegation of the Indian position, and I want to bring in Nalin Kohli. Nalin Kohli, do you believe that India now should formally come out and oppose the US line on Iran? That it needs to come out and say that Iran was way out of line, that the United States was way out of line by describing Iran as a state sponsor of terror, and that it skipped completely any and every reference to Pakistan. Let me first actually ask that question of Bharat Karnat. Let me ask you, sir. Do you believe that India should immediately step up to the plate, issue a statement saying that they distance themselves from Mr. Pompeo's rather unfortunate remarks? Mr. Karnat, can you hear me? Okay, we can't hear him. Okay, Nalin Kohli, would you like to take that question?
Certainly, Rahul, just a preliminary starting comment for you to know. I don't have audio coming, so I'm hearing you through the TV. So there may be a little bit of a gap between your question if you ask me a subsequent question and my answer. But I've heard your question. So frankly, the government is going to decide what it needs to do, whether a statement is to be put out, not put out. But I think let's go to the fundamentals. We have our own perspective, as the foreign minister clearly said. The Americans are entitled to their own perspective. We are very clear. The world also recognizes that position, that we believe that Pakistan in our neighborhood is an extremely dangerous place with regard to terrorism, perpetrating terror. In fact, we consider it as an epicenter of terrorism, and that has been recently acknowledged with the designation of Masood Azhar by the UN. So therefore, our perspective is well known, and I think if on this visit, the Secretary of State of the United States felt he wanted to put across a perspective from the Indian media or in that press conference, he's entitled to do so. But India's positions are well known, and I think the Foreign Minister
Sir,
of India, Mr.
you were
Jaishankar,
upstaged
Dr. Jaishankar,
in
clearly
public.
said so.
Now,
And made
Iran
it
is
very
an
clear
important
that we
friend. It
have our
advocates a
concerns,
strong role for
we
India and
have our
Afghanistan
merits,
to check
and we
Pakistan's
certainly are going to
influence.
articulate those.
It collaborates with India on Chahbar port to neutralize China-backed Gwadar port in Pakistan. It's an important friend for us. Bharat Karnat, do you think the Indian government should immediately issue a statement denouncing the American line on Iran, especially when it was obviously used to bait India on Indian soil?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of Pompeo's aims on this visit was to, in fact, provoke India into siding with the United States or siding with Iran. The fact of the matter is, Iran is very central to our strategy for not just Afghanistan, which the US condones, but also Central Asia and the connectivity angle to the Russian northern distribution network to reach Europe by land. Now, these are the sorts of things that that are in India's interest, that the Indian government doesn't seem to be either taking into consideration or did not put, adequately communicate to Pompeo. Now, the fact of the matter is, Pompeo has made clear what the United States' priorities are. We haven't, unfortunately, done the same. We may have said, well, we'll keep our relations with Russia and we'll buy the S-400, but, we began by trying to soften up the United States by off-taking some 10 or 12 P-8Is, the maritime reconnaissance aircraft.
Absolutely.
Just before Pompeo's visit. What was that about?
Yes.
If we are more central to the United States, because the United States cannot deal with China without us centrally there. And yet we are not leveraging our position.
We're not leveraging.
To demand what we want, and instead are being fobbed off with Pakistan and Azhar Masood and all these kinds of minor issues. The major issue is we have to keep the Iran card very much in play, and we have to very much recognize that we as an asset in dealing with China in the Indo-Pacific,
America
cannot just
always
be wished away by
prioritizes
anybody,
its own,
leave alone the United States.
Yes, America always, in dealing with other countries, prioritizes its own national interest. I think India should do the same when it comes to America. I think we really need to come out with a statement to say that Mr. Pompeo was out of line to refer to Iran as a state sponsor of terror on our soil. On our soil. Very quickly. Naren Kohli, very quickly. When it comes to America, I think we really need to come out with a statement to say that... Okay, I think we've lost his audio, but the basic problem is that America has begun to dictate terms. USA has never called Pakistan a state sponsor of terrorism despite India's urgings, but we have seen them today referring to one of our friends who has also helped us out in taking a pro-Kashmir position and blocking Pakistan's attempt at adopting Kashmir-specific resolutions at the United Nations. So here is a all-weather friend in Iran, and we might have let it down. We've got to think about our priorities. We leave it at that.